pub is too quiet after closing. No clinking glasses, no laughter. Just the hum of the coolers and the faint groan of the old wood settling in the dark. I was counting the till when I heard it. Footsteps. Light. Quick. Pattering across the roof overhead. At first I thought it was a raccoon, maybe a stray gull. But then it came again. Closer this time. Faster, like someone running. I stepped outside, the chill of the bay rolling through the empty lot. The roofline was dark. Empty. Nothing moved. I was halfway back to the door when I saw him, just for a second, a small figure perched on the edge of the roof, legs swinging in the night. I blinked, and he was gone. But the shingles where he'd been sitting glistened wet in the moonlight, dripping like it had just rained. My name's Connor Lindbergh, and 6 months ago I would have laughed at anyone telling me this story. I was living in Milwaukee then, working tech support for a healthcare company, scrolling through the same complaints day after day. The divorce papers came in February. Lisa wanted the condo, the car, everything we'd built in our 4 years together. She said I'd become emotionally unavailable. Maybe she was right. That's when my Uncle Hank called about the bartending job in Egg Harbor. He owned a marina down by the docks, knew the owner of Shipwrecked Brew pub needed someone for the night shift. Door County was dead in winter, he said, but the tips were good during tourist season, and I could stay in his guest cabin for cheap. I drove up Highway 42 on a gray March morning, past the cherry orchard still bare from winter, through Fish Creek and Ephraim, until I reached the little harbor town that would become my new home. Egg Harbor sits tucked between rolling hills and Green Bay's icy waters. Population 201, according to the faded welcome sign. Main Street runs just 3 blocks before it hits the marina, lined with gift shops that close at sunset and a single grocery store that stocks more fishing bait than fresh produce. Shipwrecked Brew Pub squats at the corner of Main and Harbor Drive, a converted fish house from the 1940s. The owner, Janet Kowalski, hired me after a 10-minute conversation. She had tired eyes and calloused hands, spoke with the thick accent that comes from 3 generations of Door County winters. Night shift's different here, she told me, sliding a folded paper across the scarred wooden table. Follow these, and you'll do fine. I should have read those rules more carefully that first day. Should have asked why the previous bartender left so suddenly, why Janet's hands shook when she handed me the key to the back door. Should have wondered why the locals stopped coming after 10 p.m., leaving only tourists and the occasional trucker passing through. But I needed the job, needed the distance from everything I'd left behind in Milwaukee. So I tucked the rules into my pocket and started my new life in Egg Harbor, serving drinks and wiping down tables in a town where the fog rolls in thick each night and strange things move in the darkness beyond the harbor lights. My first shift started at 6 p.m. on a Thursday in late March. Snow still clung to the shadows between buildings, and the harbor looked like hammered steel under the overcast sky. Inside, Shipwrecked Brew Pub felt warm and lived in, all exposed beams and ship wheels nailed to the walls. The smell of fried perch and old wood polish hung in the air. Janet walked me through the basics. Taps on the left served local brews, bottles in the cooler behind me. Register was temperamental, but worked if you hit the side just right. The dinner crowd was winding down, mostly locals finishing plates of whitefish and talking about ice conditions on the bay. "Connor, meet Darla Benson," Janet said, nodding toward a woman in her 60s nursing a Miller High Life. "Been coming here since before I owned the place." Darla looked me over with sharp blue eyes. "You're Hank Lindbergh's nephew. Heard you came up from Milwaukee." "That's right. City boy." She took a long pull from her beer. "Hope you last longer than the previous one." "What happened to him?" Darla and Janet exchanged a look. Tommy Rasmussen, Darla said finally. Good kid. Worked here 2 years, then just stopped showing up in February. Janet wiped down a glass with more force than necessary. People leave Door County. Happens all the time, especially in winter. By 9 p.m., the crowd had thinned to just a few stragglers. The Benson woman left with a wave, and Janet started counting the register. The last couple, tourists from Illinois judging by their Chicago Bears sweatshirts, paid their tab and headed out into the night. All right, Janet said, pulling that folded paper from her apron. Time we went over these. She spread the rules on the bar between us. 8 items, handwritten in blue ink. Lock the front door at 10:30 p.m. sharp. Do not open it again until 6 a.m. Keep the jukebox unplugged after 11 p.m. If it starts playing on its own, do not approach it. The booth in the back corner stays empty from midnight to 3 a.m. If someone sits there, serve them without making eye contact. Do not go upstairs. The second floor is off limits during night shift. If you hear children's voices, check that both bathroom doors are locked from the inside. The lobster tank must stay lit all night. If the light goes out, replace it immediately. Never serve the copper kettle beer after midnight. It's not on our menu anyway. If anyone asks about the keeper's light, tell them it burned out years ago. I stared at the paper. Janet, what is this? She folded her arms. Rules that'll keep you safe. This building's been here since 1943, Connor. Used to be Gunderson's fish house before I bought it. Some places, they hold on to things. What kind of things? The kind that don't like being disturbed. She grabbed her coat from behind the register. My grandfather worked these waters for 40 years. He always said Door County's got thin spots. Places where the old world bleeds through. This pub sits on one of them. I wanted to laugh, but something in her voice stopped me. You're serious? Tommy thought it was funny too. First few weeks anyway. Janet headed for the door, then paused. Follow the rules, Connor. Don't try to be brave or curious. Just follow them, and you'll make it through your shifts just fine. The door chimed as she left, and suddenly I was alone in Shipwrecked Brew pub with 8 rules that made no sense and a lobster tank humming in the corner. The red light inside cast strange shadows on the wall, making the lobsters look like they were dancing. I read through the rules again. What was copper kettle beer? And what was the keeper's light? I'd grown up on stories of Door County's lighthouses, but I'd never heard of one called that. The jukebox in the corner caught my attention. An old Wurlitzer from the 80s, unplugged just like the rules demanded. Sheet music was scattered on top of it, yellowed with age. I couldn't make out the songs in the dim light. At 10:25, I walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed louder than it should have. Outside, Egg Harbor was settling into darkness, streetlights creating small pools of yellow on the empty sidewalks. The harbor beyond looked black as ink. That's when I noticed the wet footprints. Small ones, leading from the door to the back corner booth, the one that was supposed to stay empty. They glistened on the worn wooden floor, each print perfect and distinct, like a child had walked through puddles and tracked water inside. But I'd been watching the door. No one had come in. I grabbed a towel and knelt to wipe up the first print. The moment the cloth touched the floor, the water vanished. Not absorbed, gone, like it had never been there at all. Standing slowly, I looked toward that back corner booth. It sat empty in the shadows, waiting. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The first hour passed quietly. I cleaned glasses, restocked bottles, and tried not to stare at that corner booth. Every few minutes, I'd glance over expecting to see someone sitting there, but it remained empty under the warm glow of the hanging lamp. Around 11:15, a trucker wandered in from Highway 42. Big guy, probably 50, wearing a packer's cap and smelling like diesel fuel and truck stop coffee. He settled onto a bar stool with a grunt. "What can I get you?" "Miller Lite and whatever's on the grill." "Kitchen closed at 10, but I can make you a sandwich." He nodded, pulling out his phone to check messages. I poured his beer and started assembling a ham and cheese in the small kitchen behind the bar. The bread was day old, but it would do. Outside, wind rattled the windows facing the harbor. That's when the jukebox came alive, not with music, with light. The Wurlitzer suddenly blazed like a carnival ride, all neon and spinning colors. The trucker looked up from his phone, confused. Thought that thing wasn't plugged in. My stomach dropped. Rule number 2 echoed in my head. Keep the jukebox unplugged after 11 p.m. If it starts playing on its own, do not approach it. "It's not," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The machine began cycling through selections, letters and numbers flashing on the display. B7, A3, C12. Each selection blinked twice before moving to the next. No sound came from the speakers, just the soft whir of mechanisms inside the cabinet. The trucker slid off his stool. "Might be a short in the wiring. Want me to take a look?" "No." I stepped around the bar, blocking his path. "Leave it alone, it'll stop." He gave me a strange look but returned to his beer. I finished his sandwich, hands shaking slightly as I cut it in half. The jukebox continued its silent light show, casting red and blue patterns across the back wall. After 10 more minutes, the lights died as suddenly as they'd started. The trucker finished eating, left a $5 tip, and headed back to his rig. I watched through the window as his truck pulled onto Highway 42, taillights disappearing toward Sturgeon Bay. Midnight came with the sound of footsteps overhead. Slow, measured steps crossing from one end of the ceiling to the other, back and forth, like someone pacing. I stared up at the exposed beams, following the sound. Rule 4 was clear. Do not go upstairs. The second floor is off limits during night shift. The footsteps stopped directly above the corner booth. I found myself holding my breath, listening. The pub felt different now, charged with something I couldn't name. Even the lobster tank seemed quieter, its red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Then I heard the children, faint at first, like voices carried on wind, laughing, calling to each other. It took me a moment to realize the sound was coming from the restrooms. Both doors were closed, men's room on the left, women's on the right. Rule 5. If you hear children's voices, check that both bathroom doors are locked from the inside. I walked over slowly, each step seeming too loud on the wooden floor. The voices grew clearer as I approached. 2 kids, maybe 3, playing some kind of game. "Ready or not, here I come." "No fair!" You looked. I reached for the men's room door first. The handle turned easily, unlocked. The children's laughter stopped abruptly, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I pushed the door open to reveal an empty bathroom, just 2 urinals and a stall with graffiti carved into the walls. The women's room door was locked. I rattled the handle to be sure, and from inside came a single giggle, high and sweet. Then silence. Back at the bar, I poured myself a shot of whiskey. My hands had stopped shaking, but my mouth tasted like copper. 3 rules triggered in less than an hour. What was this place? I pulled out my phone and Googled Gunderson's Fish House Egg Harbor. Most results were about the current restaurant scene, but I found an archived article from the Door County Advocate dated 1962. Local fish house, scene of tragedy, EGG Harbor. The Gunderson Fish House was the site of a devastating accident Wednesday when 3 children fell through thin ice while playing near the harbor. Edith Kowalski, 7, her brother Peter, 5, and neighbor girl Susan Anderson, 6, were found the next morning by fishermen checking their nets. The children had apparently been playing hide-and-seek around the fish house when they wandered onto the ice. Spring thaw had weakened the harbor ice, though it appeared solid from shore. "They must have been there all night," said Harbor Master Robert Thill. "The families looked everywhere, but who would think to check the water?" Funeral services will be held Saturday at Shepherd of the Bay Lutheran Church. Edith Kowalski. Same last name as Janet. My boss's family had lost children here, right where I was sitting. I scrolled through more results and found a reference to something called the Keeper's Light. Apparently, there had been a small lighthouse at the end of the Egg Harbor Pier, built in 1901 to guide fishing boats safely to dock. It was dismantled in 1954 when the Coast Guard installed electric harbor lights. Rule 8 suddenly made more sense. If anyone asks about the Keeper's Light, tell them it burned out years ago. At 1:30 a.m., exhaustion started setting in. I'd been running on adrenaline and whiskey, but now my eyelids felt heavy. The pub had been quiet for over an hour. No footsteps overhead, no jukebox lights, no children's voices. I was nodding off against the register when movement in my peripheral vision snapped me awake. Someone was sitting in the corner booth. A woman, maybe middle-aged, wearing a blue winter coat that dripped steadily onto the floor. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face, and she sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table. I couldn't see her features clearly in the dim light, but something about her posture seemed wrong. Too straight, too rigid. Rule 3. The booth in the back corner stays empty from midnight to 3 a.m. If someone sits there, serve them without making eye contact. I grabbed a glass of water and walked over slowly. The woman didn't move as I approached, didn't acknowledge my presence. Water pooled around her chair, same as those footprints from earlier. "Can I get you anything?" I asked, setting the water on the table while looking at the wall behind her. She didn't respond. Didn't even seem to breathe. I waited 30 seconds, then returned to the bar. When I glanced back, the booth was empty again. The puddle of water remained, spreading across the worn wooden floor like a stain that wouldn't dry. Only an hour and a half until 3 a.m. I checked the lobster tank, light still burning red and steady, and settled in to wait. The water from the corner booth refused to dry. I'd mopped it twice, but within minutes it would seep back through the floorboards like the building itself was bleeding moisture. By 2 a.m., I gave up trying to clean it and focused on staying alert. That's when I noticed the lobster tank light flickering. The red bulb above the tank sputtered once, twice, then died completely. The lobsters scuttled in sudden darkness, their claws scraping against glass. Rule 7 was explicit. The lobster tank must stay lit all night. If the light goes out, replace it immediately. I fumbled under the bar for spare bulbs, hands shaking as I unscrewed the dead fixture. The replacement bulb was smaller than the original, casting a dimmer glow, but it would have to do. The lobsters settled back into their slow dance, and I breathed easier. From outside came the distant sound of a car engine. Headlights swept across the front windows as someone pulled into the parking lot. My watch showed 2:17 a.m. Who would be coming to a closed bar at this hour? 3 sharp knocks echoed through the pub. I approached the front door cautiously. Through the glass, I could see a figure silhouetted against their car's headlights, average height, wearing what looked like a thick jacket. They knocked again, more insistent this time. "We're closed," I called through the door. "Please," came a woman's voice, muffled but clear. "I need help. My car broke down." Every instinct told me to help, but Rule 1 was absolute. Lock the front door at 10:30 p.m. sharp. Do not open it again until 6 a.m. "There's a gas station in Fish Creek," I said. "About 10 miles north. They have a tow truck." "I can't make it that far. Please, I just need to use your phone." I pulled out my cell phone and held it up so she could see the screen through the glass. "No signal out here anyway. You'll have better luck at the marina. There's a payphone by the boat launch." The woman stepped closer to the door. In the dim light from inside, I could see her face more clearly. She was maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to her skull like she'd been caught in rain. But the night was clear. No precipitation at all. "I know you're in there alone," she said, and something in her tone made my skin crawl. "I can see you. Young man with dark hair, wearing a black Shipwrecked Brew pub t-shirt. You look just like your Uncle Hank when he was your age." How could she know about Hank? How could she see my shirt in this light? I backed away from the door. The woman pressed her palms against the glass, leaving wet handprints that trickled downward like tears. "Let me in, Connor. Let me in, and I'll tell you what really happened to Tommy Rasmussen." I'd never told her my name. "Tommy's fine," I said, trying to sound confident. "He moved away." The woman laughed, a sound like water gurgling down a drain. "Oh, Connor, sweet boy. Tommy didn't move away. Tommy's still here. He's been here all along." She stepped back from the door, and I could see her more clearly now. Water dripped steadily from her clothes, forming puddles on the pavement. Her eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "Ask Janet about the keeper's light," she said. "Ask her what happens to bartenders who don't follow the rules." The headlights went out. The parking lot plunged into darkness, and when my eyes adjusted, the woman was gone. Her car was gone too, leaving only wet footprints leading from the door toward the harbor. I grabbed the bar phone and dialed Janet's number. It rang 4 times before her groggy voice answered. "Connor? What's wrong?" Someone just came to the door, a woman. She knew my name, knew about Hank. She mentioned Tommy and the keeper's light. Silence stretched across the line. Then, "Did you let her in?" "No, I followed Rule 1. "Good." Janet's voice carried relief and something else. Fear. "What did she look like?" I described the woman, her wet clothes and strange eyes. Janet was quiet for a long moment. "That was Edith," she said finally. "Edith, the little girl from 1962. She'd be 47 now if she'd lived. Sometimes they appear as they would have been, not as they were." Janet's voice was barely a whisper. "She's been coming around since Tommy's last week. We hoped she'd settle down again. What happened to Tommy?" Another pause. "He broke Rule 1. Let her in on a Thursday night in February. We found his body 3 days later, washed up near the boat launch. Coroner said he drowned, but there wasn't enough water in his lungs. It was like the lake had just taken him." My hands were trembling again. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Would you have taken the job?" Probably not. But now I was trapped here until 6 a.m., following rules that might be the only thing keeping me alive. "The Keeper's Light," I said. "What is it, really?" Janet sighed deeply. "My grandfather helped build it in 1901. Said the old Menominee fishermen warned against it. Claimed the harbor was sacred ground, not meant for bright lights and metal towers. But the town council wanted progress, wanted to bring in bigger boats and more money." "What happened?" "The light worked fine for 50 years, guided hundreds of boats safely to dock. But then children started dying, accidents mostly. Kids who'd lived by the water all their lives suddenly falling through ice or getting caught in undertows. The light was supposed to keep people safe, but it seemed to be calling them instead. Through the front windows, I could see the harbor beyond the parking lot. Moonlight painted the water silver, and somewhere out there was the spot where 3 children had died, playing hide-and-seek. They tore it down in 1954, Janet continued. Sold the metal for scrap, but the foundation's still out there at the end of the pier, 20 feet underwater. And every night, Edith and the others still look for its light. I walked back toward the bar, phone pressed to my ear. Why do they come here? This was the last place they were seen alive, playing around the old fish house while their parents worked. The building remembers them, holds on to them. The rules. They're not just to protect you from the spirits, they're to protect the spirits from our world, from getting lost here forever. The corner booth was occupied again, not by the woman in the blue coat this time, but by a small figure in a yellow raincoat. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting perfectly still with her hands folded. Water pooled around her feet. "She's here now," I whispered into the phone. "In the booth. Don't look at her directly, just serve her like the rule says." I hung up and grabbed another glass of water. My hands shook as I approached the booth, keeping my eyes fixed on the wall behind the girl. She was humming something, a children's song I half remembered from elementary school. "Can I get you anything?" I asked. The humming stopped. In a voice sweet and small, she said, "I want to go home now. I want my mama." I set the water on the table and backed away. When I looked again from behind the bar, the booth was empty. But the humming continued, soft and sad, echoing through the pub like a lullaby sung underwater. My watch showed 2:47 a.m. 13 more minutes until the booth was safe again. Until Edith would retreat back to whatever place held her during the day. But somehow, I didn't think 3 a.m. would bring the peace I was hoping for. At exactly 3 a.m., the humming stopped. The corner booth sat empty again, no trace of the little girl or her puddle of water. I checked my watch twice, then walked over to examine the booth more closely. The vinyl seat was dry, the table clean. Whatever presence had occupied that space for 3 hours was gone. I was still staring at the booth when the front door rattled. Not a knock this time, but violent shaking like someone was trying to force their way in. The deadbolt held, but the old wooden frame groaned under the pressure. I backed toward the bar, heart hammering against my ribs. "Connor." Edith's voice drifted through the glass, no longer the sweet child's tone, but something older, hungrier. "The rules change at 3. You know they do." I didn't know what she meant, but I wasn't about to ask. The door continued rattling for another minute, then stopped. Outside, everything was still except for the gentle lapping of waves against the harbor seawall. The jukebox lit up again. This time it wasn't cycling through selections randomly. The display showed a single entry, a -1. The machine hummed, mechanisms whirring to life, and suddenly music filled the pub. Not the classic rock or country you'd expect from a bar jukebox, but something older. A waltz, maybe from the 1940s, crackling with the warm distortion of an old recording. I remembered Rule 2. Do not approach it. But the music wasn't threatening. It was almost comforting, like something you'd hear at a church social or community dance. The kind of song people danced to when the world was simpler, when Egg Harbor was just a fishing village and children played by the water without fear. Through the melody, I heard footsteps on the wooden floor. Not from overhead this time, but here in the main room. Soft steps in rhythm with the music, like someone dancing alone. I looked around but saw nothing. The footsteps continued, tracing a path from the jukebox to the center of the room and back again. Then I saw her in the reflection of the back bar mirror, a young woman in a blue dress, maybe 25, with victory roll hair and red lipstick. She spun slowly near the jukebox, arms raised as if dancing with an invisible partner. When I turned to look directly, she vanished. But in the mirror, she continued her solitary waltz. I'd seen photos like this before. World War II era, when the fish house had been converted to a USO club during the summer months. Soldiers on leave would drive up from Fort McCoy to dance with local girls and forget about the war for a few hours. The woman in the mirror smiled at me and mouthed something I couldn't hear over the music. Then she pointed toward the front window. Outside in the parking lot, a figure stood motionless near the harbor. Tall, wearing what looked like a military uniform. He faced the water with his back to the pub, shoulders rigid, hands clasped behind him. Even from this distance, I could see he was soaking wet, uniform plastered to his frame. The music stopped abruptly. The jukebox lights died, and the dancing woman vanished from the mirror. The soldier in the parking lot turned around. I couldn't see his face clearly through the glass, but something about his movement was wrong. Too fluid, like he was floating rather than walking. He started toward the pub, each step bringing him closer to the front door. My mouth went dry. Rule 1 said, don't open the door until 6 a.m. But what if something decided to come through anyway? The soldier stopped just outside the window and pressed his face against the glass. His features were indistinct, blurred like a photograph left too long underwater. But his eyes burned with a pale fire that made my skin crawl. Connor Lindbergh, he said, voice muffled but clear. Nephew of Hank Lindbergh, late of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Born October 15th, 1994. Divorced February of this year. How could he know all that? You don't belong here, the soldier continued. This harbor belongs to the lost. To those who never made it home from the war, never made it home from the water. Go back to your city life while you still can. I'm not leaving, I said, though my voice cracked on the words. The soldier tilted his head, studying me. Water streamed down the glass where his face touched it. Tommy Rasmussen said the same thing. Brave boy, that one. Thought he could help us find peace. What happened to him? He tried to follow us home. But home for us is 20 feet down in the harbor mud, where the light used to shine. The soldier's burned-out eyes never blinked. Tommy's there now, keeping us company. The fish have been kind to him. Janet said he drowned. Oh, he drowned all right. Walked into the water at 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday, same as tonight. Said he could hear the keeper's light calling him home. Said he finally understood what the rules were really for. The soldier backed away from the window, leaving a perfect impression of his face in the condensation. Hollow eyes, open mouth, features that belonged more to nightmare than memory. The light burns every night, Connor. down there in the dark water where they built it all those years ago. We can see it clear as day, bright as salvation. But the living see only darkness. He was walking backward now, toward the harbor, never taking his eyes off me. When the dawn comes, you'll think you made it through your first real night. You'll think the rules kept you safe. But we'll be waiting in the water, all of us who never made it home. And sooner or later, you'll hear the light calling too. The soldier reached the edge of the parking lot, where asphalt met the rocky shore. He turned toward the harbor and walked straight into the water. No splash, no ripples. He simply merged with the dark surface like it was accepting him home. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the harbor. Moonlight painted silver paths across the gentle waves, and somewhere beneath that peaceful surface was the foundation of the keeper's light, still calling the lost home after 70 years. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Janet, you okay? Haven't heard from you since 2 a.m. I typed back, "Still here, following the rules." Her response came quickly. "Good. Almost over now. Dawn's at 5:47, 2.5 more hours. I could make it 2.5 more hours." I walked back to the bar and poured another shot of whiskey. The alcohol burned, but it helped steady my nerves. The corner booth remained empty. The jukebox stayed dark, and no children's voices echoed from the restrooms. But something had changed after 3 a.m. The pub felt different now, not safer, but like I'd passed some kind of test. The spirits weren't trying to break in anymore. They were showing me their stories, their pain, their endless wait for a light that would guide them somewhere beyond this harbor. Through the back window that faced the marina, I could see the end of the pier where the keeper's light had once stood. The water there seemed darker than the rest of the harbor, like it was holding secrets in its depths. I thought about Tommy Rasmussen, about what had driven him to walk into that water on a Thursday night in February. Had he broken Rule 1 by choice, or had something called him so strongly he couldn't resist? My watch showed 3:43 a.m. The hardest part of the night was still ahead. At 4:15 a.m., someone knocked on the back door. Not the frantic rattling from earlier, but 3 polite raps that echoed through the kitchen. I'd forgotten there was a back door until that moment. It led to the alley behind the pub, where delivery trucks dropped off beer and supplies during the day. The knocking came again, patient and persistent. I checked the rules, but they only mentioned the front door. Nothing about deliveries or back entrances. Still, something about those measured knocks made my skin prickle. Who would be making deliveries at 4 a.m.? Through the kitchen's small window, I could see a figure standing in the alley. Average height, wearing a dark jacket, face obscured by shadow. They raised their hand and knocked again. 3 raps, same rhythm as before. Connor? The voice was male, maybe middle-aged. Familiar somehow, though I couldn't place it. "It's me. Can you open up?" "We're closed," I called through the door. "I know, but I left my keys inside. I'm the morning shift. Janet sent me to cover for you early." That didn't make sense. Janet hadn't mentioned anyone else, and I was supposed to work until 6 a.m. But the voice sounded so reasonable, so normal after hours of supernatural encounters. "What's your name?" I asked. A pause. "Tommy. Tommy Rasmussen." Tommy was at the bottom of the harbor, had been there since February, yet here he was, speaking through the door, like nothing had happened. "Tommy's dead," I said. "Dead." The voice carried confusion, hurt. "Connor, what are you talking about? I just stepped out for a smoke break. I work here, remember? Night bartender, same as you." I backed away from the door, but the voice followed me, somehow carrying through the walls themselves. "Look, I know you're new, but we're a team here. Janet always said we night shift guys have to stick together. These old buildings, they get to you if you're alone too long." The voice was so reasonable, so human. Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to open that door and let Tommy in so I wouldn't have to face the rest of the night alone. "Tell me something only Tommy would know," I said. "What kind of test is that?" "All right, fine. Janet keeps the good whiskey, the Jameson 18, hidden behind the cleaning supplies under the bar. She thinks nobody knows, but we all help ourselves when she's not around." I checked. The bottle was exactly where he said it would be. "The jukebox has a short in the B7 button," Tommy's voice continued. "Sometimes it plays Hotel California 3 times in a row. Drives the locals crazy, but Janet won't pay to fix it because it only happens during busy nights when people are too drunk to complain much. Details only someone who worked here would know. But Tommy was dead. The soldier had told me so, and Janet had confirmed it." "What happened on your last night?" I asked. Silence stretched across the alley. When Tommy spoke again, his voice was different. Hollow, distant. "I followed the rules, Connor. Every single one for 2 years. But that last night, I heard something I'd never heard before." "What?" "Singing. Coming from the water. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, like angels calling me home. I looked out the front window, and there it was. What was the keeper's light, burning bright as the sun, right where it used to stand at the end of the pier. I could see it clear as day, Connor. After all those years dark, it was finally lit again." I walked to the front window and stared out at the harbor. Moonlight reflected off gentle waves, but I saw no other illumination. The end of the pier was dark. "I don't see anything," I said. "You will. When your time comes, you'll see it too." Tommy's voice was fading now, like he was walking away. "The light only burns for those it's calling home." The knocking stopped. When I checked the back window, the alley was empty. I poured another shot and tried to calm my nerves. Just over an hour until dawn. I could make it an hour. That's when I noticed the smell. Copper and brine, like old fishing nets left too long in the sun. It seemed to be coming from the kitchen, growing stronger by the minute. I followed it to the back door and found water seeping underneath, forming a dark puddle on the tile floor. Harbor water, by the smell of it. Thick and murky, carrying bits of seaweed and sand. But the alley outside was dry. I could see that through the window. The water kept coming, spreading across the kitchen floor toward the main room. I grabbed a mop and tried to soak it up, but for every gallon I absorbed, 2 more seeped through the doorframe. Within minutes, the entire kitchen was flooded ankle deep. The water was cold against my legs, so cold it made my bones ache. And in that water, things moved. Small things at first, minnows maybe, or water bugs, but as the flood spread into the main room, larger shapes darted through the murky depths. A carp brushed against my shin, then a northern pike with teeth like needles. The lobster tank began to overflow, its occupants scuttling across the floor to join their wild cousins in the rising water. The red light above flickered but held steady, casting bloody reflections on the flood. I climbed onto the bar to keep dry, watching harbor fish swim between table legs like this was their natural habitat. The whole pub had become an aquarium, filled with life that had no business existing above the waterline. Through the murky water came larger shapes. A lake trout the size of my arm glided past, followed by something that might have been a muskie. And behind them, barely visible in the depths, human figures walking along the submerged floor. Men in military uniforms, women in 1940s dresses, children in raincoats and rubber boots. They moved slowly through the flooded pub, faces pale and eyes empty, like sleepwalkers navigating an underwater dream. I recognized the little girl in the yellow raincoat, Edith, as she'd appeared in life. She walked hand in hand with two other children, probably her brother Peter and friend Susan. They looked up at me through the water and waved, their movements creating ripples that caught the lobster tank's red light. The dancing woman was there too, still waltzing with her invisible partner. Her blue dress flowed around her like seaweed, and when she spun, bubbles rose from her lips. At the back of the procession came the soldier, water streaming from his uniform as he walked. He stopped directly below my perch on the bar and looked up with those burned-out eyes. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice clear despite the water between us. "This is how we see the world, Connor. Always flooded, always cold, always calling us deeper." "This isn't real," I said, though my feet were numb from the chill. "Reality is different for everyone. For the living, this pub is dry and safe. For us, it's been underwater for 70 years, ever since they tore down our light." The children gathered around his legs like he was their father or grandfather. Edith smiled up at me, her face serene in the harbor water. "We're not trying to hurt you," the soldier continued. "We're trying to show you what Tommy saw, what drew him into the water that night in February." "The light?" "The light." He pointed toward the front window, and through the water I could see it. A brilliant white beam cutting through the darkness, emanating from the end of the pier. It pulsed like a heartbeat, like a beacon calling ships safely home. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Come down, Connor. Come see it properly." I wanted to. Every fiber of my being ached to slip down into that cold water and walk with the lost souls toward the light that promised peace, promised an end to loneliness and fear. But Janet's voice echoed in my memory. "Follow the rules, Connor. Don't try to be brave or curious." I checked my watch. 5:23 a.m., 24 minutes until dawn. "I can't," I told the soldier. "I have to stay here." He nodded sadly. "Tommy said the same thing, at first. But the light gets brighter each night, Connor. More beautiful, more irresistible. And sooner or later, everyone answers its call." The water began to recede as suddenly as it had risen. Fish scattered back toward the kitchen, followed by the walking dead in their eternal procession. Within minutes, the pub floor was dry again, showing no trace of the supernatural flood. Only the lobsters remained, scattered across the floor like evidence of a dream. I climbed down from the bar and began gathering them up, returning them to their tank one by one. Through the front window, the harbor looked normal again. Dark water reflecting moonlight, no sign of any ghostly beacon. But I could still feel it out there, waiting. The keeper's light that burned only for the lost, only for those it chose to call home. Dawn was coming. I just had to survive 20 more minutes. The minutes crawled by like hours. I sat behind the bar, watching the harbor through the front windows, waiting for that first hint of sunrise over the bluffs. My watch showed 5:31 a.m., 16 minutes until dawn. That's when the jukebox started playing again. Not the 1940s waltz this time, but something I recognized. "Come On, Eileen," by Dexys Midnight Runners, the same song that had been playing at O'Malley's Tavern in Milwaukee the night I met Lisa. We'd danced to it, laughing and spilling beer, young and stupid, and convinced we'd live forever. But that was 4 years and a lifetime ago. The music shouldn't have affected me. It was just another supernatural manifestation, another test. But hearing that song in this haunted place, after everything I'd lost, hit me like a physical blow. I thought about my empty apartment back in Milwaukee, about Lisa's new boyfriend who probably treated her better than I ever had, about how I'd ended up alone in a cursed bar, talking to dead children. Rough night? I spun around to find a man sitting at the end of the bar, tall, maybe 40, wearing a faded Packers sweatshirt and jeans. He looked completely ordinary, the kind of guy you'd see at any Wisconsin bar on a Friday night. But his clothes were bone dry despite the supernatural flood that had just receded. "Bar's closed," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "I know. I'm not here for a drink." He gestured toward the empty stool beside him. "Mind if we talk? Name's Paul Henriksen. I used to work the docks here back in '78. I stayed behind the bar, hands gripping the rail. "You're dead." Paul chuckled, a warm sound that seemed out of place in this haunted space. "Yeah, about 15 years now. Heart attack during a blizzard, right out there on Pier 3. But death's not the end in a place like this. Sometimes it's just a change of shift." The jukebox continued playing, filling the silence between us. Paul tapped his fingers on the bar in rhythm with the music, looking for all the world like any other late-night customer. "You're wondering why you," he said. "Why Connor Lindbergh from Milwaukee got called to this particular job, in this particular place, at this particular time. I hadn't been wondering that, but now I was. Your great-grandmother was Astrid Lindbergh," Paul continued. "Born right here in Egg Harbor, 1923. Worked at the fish house during the war when it was converted to that USO club. She could see things others couldn't. Spirits, omens, the thin places where the living world touches the dead. I've never heard of her. Your family moved south after the war, trying to leave the old ways behind. But gifts like that run in bloodlines, Connor. They skip generations sometimes, but they always come back." Through the windows, I could see the faintest hint of gray on the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming, but slowly. "That's why you can see us so clearly," Paul said. "Why the rules make sense to you instead of seeming like superstition. Your great-grandmother helped write some of them, actually. She understood that places like this need boundaries, need protection for both the living and the dead." My watch showed 5:37 a.m. 10 minutes. "What do you want?" I asked. Paul's expression grew serious. "We want you to stay, Connor. Not just tonight. Permanently. Janet's getting old, and she'll need help managing this place. Someone who understands what it really is. A haunted bar? A lighthouse." Paul pointed toward the harbor, where the first fishing boats of the day were starting their engines. "Not the kind that guides ships, but the kind that guides souls. The living and the dead both need anchors, need safe harbors where they can rest before moving on to whatever comes next." The jukebox switched songs. Thunder Road by Bruce Springsteen now. Another echo from my past. Lisa had played it constantly during our first year together, back when everything seemed possible. "The spirits here aren't malicious," Paul continued. "They're just lost, waiting for someone who can see them, acknowledge them, help them find their way. The rules aren't about keeping them out. They're about creating a space where both worlds can coexist safely." "What about Tommy?" Paul's face darkened. "Tommy was special, like you. But he got too involved, tried to help us cross over instead of just providing sanctuary. The Keeper's Light called him because he wanted to fix everything, wanted to save everyone. You can't save the dead, Connor. You can only give them peace." Through the front door came the sound of an engine. Headlights swept across the parking lot as someone pulled up outside. My heart rate spiked. who would be coming here 5 minutes before dawn. A car door slammed, followed by footsteps on gravel. Then Janet's voice. "Connor? You all right in there?" I looked back toward Paul, but he was gone. The jukebox fell silent, and the bar felt empty again, except for the lingering scent of old tobacco and lake water. I unlocked the front door to find Janet standing on the step, keys in hand. She looked exhausted, worry lines deep around her eyes. "I couldn't sleep," she said, stepping inside. "Kept thinking about that woman you saw. When Edith gets active, bad things happen." She tried to get me to open the door. Then Tommy came to the back entrance. Janet paled. "You didn't?" I followed the rules, all of them. Relief flooded her features. "Good. That's good." She walked to the corner booth, examining it closely. "The water stains are getting worse. It's been dry for weeks, but somehow that booth keeps flooding." I helped her flip the chairs down from the tables, restoring the pub to its daytime configuration. The lobster tank hummed peacefully, its red light casting familiar shadows on the walls. "Janet?" I said. "Who was Paul Henriksen?" She stopped mid-motion, chair halfway off a table. "Where did you hear that name?" "He was here tonight. Said he used to work the docks. Paul died in 1993. Janet set the chair down carefully. "He was my first hire when I bought this place. Worked here until the heart attack took him. Always said he'd stick around to make sure the new owners understood what they were dealing with. He told me about my great-grandmother." Janet nodded slowly. "Astrid was a good woman. Helped a lot of lost souls find their way during the war years. Paul would have known her. He grew up here. Lived here his whole life." Through the windows, the sky was definitely lighter now. Pink and gold were starting to paint the clouds over Green Bay, and the harbor was coming alive with the sounds of morning. Boat engines, seagulls, the distant rumble of delivery trucks starting their routes. My watch showed 5:46 a.m., 1 minute until official sunrise. "Connor," Janet said quietly, "I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer." "All right. Do you want to keep working here? Not just the job. I mean really working here, understanding what this place is, helping maintain the balance?" I thought about Milwaukee, about my empty apartment, and my dead-end tech job. I thought about Lisa and everything I'd lost, about the loneliness that had driven me north to Door County in the first place. Then I thought about Paul's words, about Edith and the other lost souls who needed sanctuary, about the strange purpose I'd felt following those 8 rules through the longest night of my life. "Yes," I said, "I want to stay." At exactly 5:47 a.m., the first ray of sunlight broke over the eastern bluffs, streaming through the pub's front windows and painting the wooden floor with golden light. The night shift was officially over. But somehow I knew my real work was just beginning. The morning crowd was different from the night visitors. By 8 a.m., Shipwrecked Brew pub had filled with fishermen grabbing coffee before heading out on the bay. Retirees reading newspapers over eggs and hash browns, and a handful of early tourists consulting guidebooks about Door County's famous cherry blossoms. I worked alongside Janet, learning the daytime rhythms of the place. Coffee instead of beer, breakfast specials instead of bar snacks, conversations about weather and fishing reports, instead of whispered stories about things that go bump in the night. But I could still sense them. The other presence layered beneath the normal bustle. A chill near the corner booth that made customers unconsciously choose other tables. A flicker in the jukebox display when someone walked past. The way the lobster tank's light seemed to pulse in rhythm with something only I could perceive. "You'll get used to it," Janet said quietly, refilling my coffee cup. "The dual nature of this place, Day shift and night shift are like two different worlds occupying the same space. Darla Benson came in around 9:30, settling onto her usual bar stool with a copy of the Door County Advocate. She studied me over her reading glasses. "Heard you made it through your first real night," she said. "Word traveled fast in a town of 201 people. Janet told you? Didn't need to. You've got the look now, that 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing things most folks can't. Tommy had it too toward the end." I poured her usual Miller High Life, even though it was barely past 9 a.m. In Wisconsin, time was relative when it came to drinking. "What was Tommy like?" I asked. "Before?" Darla took a thoughtful sip. "Good kid. Grew up in Sturgeon Bay. Came here after high school looking for something different. He had the gift, like you do. Could see the spirits clear as day. Talk to them like old friends." "What changed?" "He started trying to solve their problems instead of just accepting them." Darla's eyes grew distant. "There's a difference between providing comfort and trying to play God. The dead have their own journeys to make. Tommy thought he could shortcut that process." Through the front windows, I watched a Coast Guard cutter heading out toward Washington Island. Normal life continuing while supernatural forces waited beneath the surface. Janet called me over to help with inventory in the storage room behind the kitchen. Boxes of beer, bags of frozen fries, industrial-sized containers of ketchup and mustard. Mundane supplies for a place that turned otherworldly after dark. "Connor," she said, checking items off her list. "There are some things about this job you need to know. Practical things, not just the scary stories." "Like what?" "The spirits follow patterns, seasons. Spring and fall are the most active times. Something about the changing light, the way it affects the boundary between worlds. Summer brings tourists who don't understand the rules, which can create problems. And winter," she shrugged. "Winter, they get desperate, lonely. That's when they test the boundaries most." She pulled a thick folder from behind a case of Miller Lite. "These are incident reports going back 30 years. Every strange occurrence, every rule violation, every time someone didn't make it through the night." I flipped through the pages, seeing Janet's careful handwriting, documenting encounters with spirits, unexplained phenomena, and the occasional tragedy. The folder was disturbingly thick. "Tommy's file is at the back," she said softly. I found it. 6 pages of increasingly frantic reports spanning 2 years. Early entries described simple sightings and minor rule violations. But the final entries painted a picture of someone becoming obsessed, convinced he could communicate with the dead on a deeper level. The last report, dated February 18th, was brief. TR heard the light calling at 3:17 a.m., said he finally understood what they needed, left through back door despite repeated warnings. Body recovered 3 days later near boat launch. Cause of death, drowning. He thought he was chosen for something special, Janet said. Maybe he was, but not for what he imagined. We finished the inventory in silence, then returned to the main room. The lunch crowd was starting to arrive. Families with kids who ran around the tables, oblivious to the supernatural history surrounding them. Around 2 p.m., an older man came in alone, 70s maybe, wearing a faded navy ball cap and walking with a slight limp. He chose a table near the window and ordered coffee and a fish sandwich. "That's Captain Eric Larson," Janet whispered. "Retired Coast Guard. He knows more about this harbor's history than anyone alive." When the lunch rush died down, I brought Captain Larson his check. He looked up at me with eyes the color of lake water. "You're Hank Limburg's nephew," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Good man, your uncle. Helped me pull 3 kids out of this harbor back in '89 when their sailboat capsized. He mentioned you might be coming up here." The captain sipped his coffee, studying me. "Janet says you're working nights now. That's not a job for everyone." "So I'm learning?" "Your great-grandmother Astrid, she worked with my grandfather during the war years. He was a harbor master then, responsible for keeping the fishing fleet safe. She helped him understand that some dangers come from places you can't chart on any map." I sat down across from them. "What was she like?" "Practical woman. Didn't make a big fuss about her abilities, just used them when needed. She could sense when storms were coming, when the lake was in a dangerous mood. Saved a lot of lives over the years." Captain Larson pulled a worn photograph from his wallet, black and white, showing a group of people standing on the pier. "This was taken in 1943, during the worst storm season anyone could remember. See the woman in the dark coat?" I leaned closer. The woman had my mother's nose, my grandmother's eyes. Even in the faded photograph, there was something about her stance that suggested she saw more than the camera could capture. "That's Astrid, and the man next to her is my grandfather. They're standing right where the keeper's light used to be." In the photograph, the lighthouse was still intact. A modest white tower, maybe 20 feet high, topped with a traditional beacon. It looked innocent enough, but something about the image made me uneasy. "Why did they really tear it down?" I asked. Captain Larson was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Because it started guiding the wrong kinds of ships, not fishing boats or pleasure craft, but vessels that had been lost for years. Decades. Ships that existed only in memory and maritime records." He pointed to the harbor beyond the window. "Summer of 1954, old-timers started seeing things. Ghost ships trying to dock at the pier, following that light home from wherever lost vessels go. The town council decided some lights are better left dark, but it still burns underwater. For those who need to see it, yes, the foundation's still down there, still holds power. Your great-grandmother understood that destroying the physical lighthouse wouldn't eliminate what it represented. Hope for the lost, guidance for souls caught between worlds." The captain finished his coffee and stood, leaving a $10 tip on a $6 check. "Your uncle told me you've had a rough year. Divorce, job troubles, feeling like you don't belong anywhere." I nodded, surprised by his directness. "Sometimes we have to lose everything we think we want before we can find what we actually need." He headed for the door, then paused. "This place chose you, Comer, not the other way around. The sooner you accept that, the easier this job becomes." After he left, I stood at the front window, looking out at the harbor. Afternoon sunlight turned the water brilliant blue, and tourist boats were heading back to dock after their scenic tours. Everything looked peaceful, normal. But I knew that tonight, after the sunset and the rules took effect, this same harbor would transform into something else entirely. A threshold between worlds, watched over by lost souls, and tended by someone whose bloodline had been preparing for this moment for generations. The corner booth caught my eye, still empty in the afternoon light, waiting patiently for whatever spirits would claim it after midnight. My second night shift would start in 4 hours. The Halloween decorations were Janet's idea. "Tourists expect it," she said, hanging plastic bats from the ceiling while I restocked the cooler, and the spirits seemed to appreciate the acknowledgement. She was right about that. Edith had appeared twice this week, both times in the corner booth, both times leaving small gifts, a pressed flower, a smooth piece of lake glass, not threatening anymore, just checking in like an old friend. Outside, Door County was ablaze with autumn colors. The cherry trees along Highway 42 had turned brilliant red and gold, drawing weekend visitors from as far south as Chicago. Most came for the fall festivals and scenic drives, unaware that some of the county's most interesting residents had been dead for decades. My phone buzzed with a text from my Uncle Hank. "Heard from Janet you're staying permanent. Good for you. Your grandmother would be proud." I'd never told him about the supernatural aspects of the job. Some things were better left unexplained, even to family. He just knew I'd found something in Egg Harbor that Milwaukee couldn't provide. Purpose, community, a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. The divorce papers were finalized now. Lisa had kept the condo and most of our shared possessions, which felt appropriate somehow. That life belonged to someone else. Someone who couldn't see the thin places where worlds overlapped. "Connor," Janet called from behind the register. "Mrs. Antonelli's here." I looked up to see an elderly woman in a thick wool coat, probably 80 years old, leaning heavily on a walker. She came in every few weeks, always ordering the same thing: decaf coffee and a slice of apple pie. But Mrs. Antonelli was different from other customers. She could see them too. "How are our friends tonight?" she asked, settling onto a bar stool. "Quiet so far. Paul stopped by earlier, but he just wanted to check the pilot light on the water heater." She chuckled. That man was always fussing about maintenance when he was alive. Death hasn't changed him much. I poured her coffee and cut a generous slice of pie. Mrs. Antonelli had grown up in Egg Harbor, married a fisherman, raised 4 children in a house overlooking the bay. She'd been seeing spirits her whole life, treating them as part of the community rather than something to fear. "My grandson's getting married next spring," she said, stirring cream into her coffee. "They want to have the reception here." "That's wonderful. Janet will be thrilled for the business." I told them about the rules, of course. Just the basic ones. No loud music after 11. Keep the corner booth clear during certain hours. They think it's all local superstition, but they'll follow them out of respect. The front door chimed as a young couple entered, tourists by their matching Wisconsin Dells sweatshirts. They chose a table near the windows, away from the corner booth that always felt a few degrees colder than the rest of the room. "They can sense it," Mrs. Antonelli observed quietly. "Even people who don't believe in such things know to avoid certain spaces." As the evening progressed, the familiar patterns emerged. The jukebox light flickered occasionally, never quite going out. Footsteps echoed overhead, keeping their measured pace. The lobster tank hummed steadily, its red light casting protective shadows on the walls. I'd learned to read the signs, to anticipate which nights would be quiet and which would test my resolve. Tonight felt peaceful. The spirits were content, the boundaries were holding, and the ancient balance between worlds remained stable. At closing time, I went through the ritual of locking up, checking each rule one final time. The front door at 10:30 sharp, jukebox unplugged, bathrooms secured, lobster tank light burning steady. Through the windows, Egg Harbor settled into darkness, and somewhere beneath the black waters of the harbor, the keeper's light pulsed with its eternal rhythm, calling the lost home while I stood watch above, guardian of the thin places where the living and dead found peace together. This was exactly where I belonged.